Gurur Brahma, Gurur Vishnu, Gurur Devo Maheshwara, Gurureva Param Brahma, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Chinmayam Vyapyat Sarvam, Trilokyam Sacharacharam, Tatpadam Darshitam Yena, Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Tvameva Mata cha Pita Tvameva, Tvameva Bandhuscha Sakha Tvameva, Tvameva Vedyadravitam Tvameva, Tvameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva, Tvameva Sarvam Mama Deva Deva. Jai Guru. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Matrurupena Sanstita, Namastasyai, 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 Namo Namaha. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Shakti Rupena Sanstita, Namastasyai, 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 Namo Namaha. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Buddhi Rupena Sanstita, Namastasyai, 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 Namo Namaha. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Lakshmi Rupena Sanstita, Namastasyai, 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 Namo Namaha. So last week we ended chapter 18 and began chapter 19. And at the end of chapter 18, he set up the discussion on chapter 19, talking about the experiences of the man or woman of realization, the jnani. And Dattatreya has enumerated 3 orders of jnani. These are not stages of bondage and release, bondage and liberation. They have to do with the experiences of the realized soul. We talked about the lowest order of jnana. We had this last week. We went into depth in 19. These are those people who still have, because of their prarabdha, ignorance on occasion will overtake the mind. And when it does, then they suffer just like ordinary people. But then their jnanam, their knowledge returns. It's like waking up from a dream. They go, oh, how could I have been so deluded? It all goes away. They drop it. What is the sign of the man or woman of knowledge? I know that my essential nature is Brahman. Then we briefly talked about the second order. These are those whose minds have had a lot of desire and stuff like that, so they've done an enormous amount of tapas, They've essentially destroyed much of the mind. These jnanis are seen to be fond of samadhi. They're just. This scripture talks about the highest order of jnani are those whose minds are incredibly subtle. There is no need to remove all those proclivities. And they function in the world with this effortless samadrishna. The mind is at peace. They laugh at the world, but they're seen to be active in it. And again, we contrasted this with the discussion of the 7 jnana bhumikas that we looked at on Monday night, where they kind of reverse the order, where they say these deep revelries in the samadhi, like Anandamaya mind, Ramana Maharshi and Ramakrishna, they say that's the highest. So the point that I'm getting at is, don't worry about it. These post-enlightenment samadhis are karmic. They have to do with punya, done in other lives. And if you're struggling to have some state, then you don't really understand jnana yet. You're still a desirer of desires. All right, what verse are we on now?
1415 on page 347.
You help us out, Puneet.
347 page.
I think that's what he said.
Yes, that's what I said.
Vasanal padhika bhavat buddhistu vivadha bhavet yasya yavat vasanaudho buddhim achadhya sanstitah sadhanapekshanam tasya tavadeva bhrigu tuiha. Descendant of Bhrigu. But on account of the state of abundance or scantiness of mental impressions, the intellect can be of various natures. As much of the multitude of mental impressions is settled covering the intellect of a person, so much alone is the necessity for means of or spiritual effort for him.
Yes. So whether or not there's just a little bit of vasana covering the mind, or there's a lot, this will determine how much sadhana we need to do. Some people, I mean, I had a student, and Westerner, retired Army major. You wouldn't have think of him as a yogi. From Louisiana, he talks kind of like this. I want to learn to meditate, Chen. So on our very third meeting together, I was intuitively led to lead him on the journey of subject-object discrimination. No framework, no preparation, no scripture study. You are not your body, you're the knower of your body. You are not your feelings, you are the knower of your feelings. You are not your thoughts, you are the knower of your thoughts. Now in the space between your thoughts, who sees the thoughts and the space between the thoughts? I think on that occasion I said, now listen to the traffic with a very quiet mind. Who or what hears? There was this rush of Shakti. Oh. His ignorance was gone. Who's to say? But other students who come for decades, God bless them. But there's still a lot of asana. We don't see. So we don't get to choose how much stuff is in there. We've spent lifetimes piling it on. We spend lifetimes doing tapas, so we wouldn't even be open to a scripture like this. But how rooted in knowledge you are, that will depend on how much vasana you need to make your way through. Any questions on this? Next verse.
Vasana vividha prokta tatra mukhya vadami te aparadha karma kama bhedena trividha hisa. Mental impressions are declared as various. There I shall describe the principal ones. That mental impression is of three kinds by the difference of fault, action, and desire.
So here he's going to go into the types of vasanas we have. And he's going to lump them into three categories. Now, again, part of what is an integral part of Hindu culture, and especially scripture, is this delight in making lists. So again, don't be too concerned. Oh, is it this one? Is it number two, number three? So the three of them again are fault, action, and desire, right? Fault, action, and desire. Let's see how he works with these, the kinds of vasanas that we can have. Going on.
Ashraddhe vaparadha syad mukhya swatma vinashanaha viparita grihaschapi hyaparadhastu paurushaha. Absence of faith in the scriptures alone would be the principal fault, which is the destroyer of one's own self. Contrary or wrong perception regarding the purusha or the self is also a fault, or aparadha.
So here he says the two main faults are one, lack of faith in the scriptures. And we can say for people, those of us in the West, absolute ignorance that self-realization exists. But for Hindus, we know it exists, but I have no faith in it. It's superstition. That's the first fault. What was the second one? Oh, misunderstanding about the nature of the purusha, the person. If ultimately I just think I'm the body, that's the core identification that we all have. But we could have other things. I did a class in someone's home several weeks ago, and this fellow, he'd obviously been listening to some guru, and he was talking about my soul, and the soul does this, and the soul does that. And it was very clear that he had ideas about his soul. And what it was just challenging to do was to say, no, wait, let's set aside all your ideas about souls. What in God's name is a soul? I held up my glass and I said, who sees the glass? I do. That's yourself. Now let's talk about the self and what it is. All right, so those are two defects, faults in our understanding. Going on.
Praya kalasu kushala aparadha vashananu satya shastra yogescha param tattvam hi no viduhu. Mostly people who are proficient in the arts on accounts of faults, indeed do not know the supreme principle, even by means of association with the wise and the scriptures.
So people who are involved in what? The arts?
Yeah.
I have no idea what he means by that. Read it again, please, for me.
Mostly people who are proficient in the arts on account of faults indeed do not know the supreme principle, even by means of association with the wise and the scriptures.
So I'm not sure what he means by that first part about proficient in the arts. I don't know if he means the fine arts, humanities, or arts meaning study of the world in general. But even if you're really, really smart, have a high IQ. I mean, even if you've got, we have a family guru, he lives 3 doors down. We go for satsang, and I sleep through it every Sunday. It's very restful. Or you think of the guru as a fortune teller. Oh, Swamiji, my niece is coming. Will you bless her marriage? When you were at the Sringeri Mutt, what kinds of things did people bring to the Shankaracharya?
Yeah, all kinds of family related things, property, starting a new business.
And they wanted his blessings or his opinions or stuff like that.
Right.
Did anyone say, Guruji, how do I know myself? No. Or I'm thinking of a student I have, and she's moved out of town. And I said, well, how are you doing on your sadhana? I said, oh, I went to a guru, and he gave me a mantra so I can get a husband. All right. This is a fault. Now, there are mantras in the Vedas for getting a husband. But you're missing the point of the scripture, and you're not availing yourself of the value of the gurus. Next one.
Nirvishesham param tattvam nasti naiva cha sambhavet asti tannaiva vijnasu shakti kenachit kvachit gyatvapi paramam tattvam naitatvam param bhavet etad jnanat katham moksha ityadi bahudha stitah viparit graho vapi chetat sanshaya eva va. A supreme principle without attributes does not exist. Surely it is not possible. Even if it exists, it cannot be known by anybody anywhere. Even having known the supreme principle, this principle may not be the highest. How can there be liberation through the knowledge of this entity? Thus, and such like existing variously are the wrong perceptions or even doubt about the supreme principle.
Yeah, so let's look at them one by one and talk about them briefly. The first one.
A supreme principle without attributes does not exist.
Yes, there's no such thing as self-realization, doesn't exist. It's all superstition. The priest class has done it to keep everybody else behaving. Next idea.
Even if it exists, it cannot be known by anybody anywhere.
Yes, so these are those. There is a school of philosophy that says all action under all conditions is motivated by desire. Desire is the function of ignorance. So anybody who's in the body and acting can't be a man or woman of knowledge. The only liberation is beyond. So it can't be known by anybody in the flesh. That's a fault. Next idea.
Even having known the supreme principle, this principle may not be the highest.
Well, there was one where it can't be known by me. Did we skip that one or is that later?
It says it cannot be known by anybody anywhere.
Okay.
That was the second one.
Well, and I'm going to modify that because one of the ones we can say is, oh, yes, there are great saints, there are great sages, but I could never get that. I'm too vulgar. For me, get a wife, get a husband, make a lot of money, worldly happiness. Next lifetime, I'll try. So what was the one that he actually articulated?
Even having known the supreme principle, this principle may not be the highest.
Yes. So maybe there's a self beyond the self. Maybe there's something even more. Who's to say that self-realization is the end of knowledge? Veda Anta. Is that all of them?
One more. How can there be liberation through the knowledge of this entity?
So how can it cause liberation? How can knowledge cause liberation? You think I'd have to change into something much different, like a goddess or a celestial being or something like that. All these are wrong ideas. And this is only illustrating the kinds of wrong ideas that we can have. These are the faults. Going on, next verse.
Aparadha paurushastu vasanadhya prakritriya shastra vidya sukushala shatashotha sahasrashah anaya vihata rama sansritim samupagataha. The fault regarding the Purusha or the self is the first vasana or mental impression. Rama, hundreds and thousands of people who are proficient in scriptural lore, obstructed by this fault, have undergone transmigratory existence.
So this is when I think I am a person. Misunderstanding about Purusha, a person. And it can be very subtle. I have a friend, I haven't spoken with them in several years, who's, even though they've been doing yoga for decades, is still very unhappy. Another friend of mine asked her, what is it that you want? And her response was, I want to be like the saints. So she's taken sannyas, she has the name, she had an ashram, but no peace, and therefore nobody came. Listen carefully. To want to be like a saint is to want to be a special kind of person. To want to be a guru is to want to be a kind of person. To want your friends to know how spiritual you are is to want to be a kind of person. Only two kinds of people in the world. Those who think they're a person, and even those who are very deluded. I'm convinced I'm a realized person. And those who know they are Brahman, not a person at all. So ego is very tricky. It can begin to possess the path itself. Any thoughts on this? Next one.
Pura dushkrita sanskara vashat buddhau tu yat sthitam malinyam upadeshasya grihana pratibandhakam yena charyai samyak guptam apino grihyate khalu sakarma vasana prokta durjeyapi nirodhatah. That is called the mental impression due to action or karma vasana, which is the impurity existing in the intellect on account of the impression or influence of former evil deeds, which is obstructing the comprehension of the teaching, and by which even what is told distinctly by the teachers is surely not grasped. That karma vasana is also difficult to overcome through restraint of the mind.
Yes. So because of past actions, deleterious actions done in other lives or this one, we have these deep impressions which cloud the mind. How does that tend to manifest itself? Even though you hear the teaching, even though at times you may be able to tune up the mind, the force of compulsion to act, to acquire, to gain, to achieve, to possess is too strong. We have no mature vairagya. And the best we can do is hold on to the feet of the Lord. Go through the karma. Get our allotted dose of pains and sorrows in life. Any thoughts on this?
So there's no hope for such people then in this lifetime.
Well, other scriptures will say that continuing your scripture study, contact with the Guru, and God's grace, it can be overcome. That's my opinion. Now, remember what the Lord himself says in Gita. Arjuna says, okay, Lord, what if you don't attain self-realization in this very life? Are you doomed? And Krishna says, no, my devotee is never lost. Can't take your money, can't take your real estate, can't take your job titles when you die. But you do take your yoga. And then in the next life, you'll be born into a noble family. Get these spiritual sanskaras at an early age. You're reunited with your former knowledge, and you proceed quickly with steady wisdom. So Uday, what I would say, there's always hope.
Okay.
There's always hope. And it's not just Jim, the Lord himself has said that. Now, there is no more painful state than a head full of Vedanta and a heart full of desire. At least before you do study, you can go out in the world and try to be a bogey, getting all the drug, sex, and rock and roll in the world, the cash prices. And if you're unsuccessful or that doesn't work, you can say, bad luck. They are just not doing it right. I'll try changing jobs, different this, different that. We can labor under the illusion. that if I change the world, it's going to change. But the fellow who's bothered to study some, oh boy, then when he's disappointed in the world, not if, when, because we always are. He knows what's happening. I've told many of the other students when I was doing my sadhana in the ashram, my nickname for my mind was Mudha, fool. There you are wanting again. And it was so boring and so repetitive, and I couldn't stop. But after a while, the suffering itself will bring us back to the path. Krishna says, my devotee is never lost. Don't just believe me, believe the Lord. Is that helpful?
Yes, very much, Jim. Thank you.
All right, next verse.
Kama kartavya shesha syad ananto bahu shakakah ramam bodhau taranganam sankyam kuryadhi kaschana parthevanam mnunam vatatha tara ganasya va ekasyapi hi kamam nam sankhyatum naiva shaktaye iyam rama tritayate samprokta kama vasana. Desire would be the residue of deeds to be done, which is endless and many branched. Rama, someone may indeed perform the enumeration of the waves on the sea, or of the terrestrial particles, and likewise of the multitude of stars. It is quite not possible to count the desires of even one person. Rama, this is the third, that is, mental impression due to desire or kama vasana that was declared to you.
Yes. So the desires in the human heart are infinite in number. So we start by working on the big ones, the addictive tendencies, and we do it through insight. You have to think the action through. This is why when I teach my art of meditation class, I start with what I call the pleasure principle. What does it feel like to want something you don't have? It hurts. Yoga says there's no other suffering than wanting something I don't have, or the flip side, wanting to get rid of something I don't like, or the neurotic form, I have what I want, but I'm afraid I'm going to lose it. And we set physical pain on the shelf for now, because that's not what tortures most of us. And then I ask these new people, can you find any other kind of suffering? What do we do about it? Most of us try to get what we want. When desire and object of desire become one, what happens? For a moment, the mind has been freed from its longing. If I really want pizza, I get the pizza. When I eat the pizza, I don't want pizza anymore for a while. Then ice cream arises. So we watch the mind. We watch how the cause of my suffering is the kama, the craving, the spriha, the longing, the vancha, the wanting. And then own your ananda. Watch your mind. Pleasure tastes the same. Whether it's ice cream, beautiful music, making love, what it does to my mind is the same, makes me happy. I have used the object to get a taste, a kiss of the bliss of Brahman, Swamiji used to say. Don't be fooled by the world. Shankara will say, at least don't embrace a rotting corpse thinking it's a beautiful bride. Through insight, through paying attention, through observing the dosha, the defect, going after the world, we're able to start to let the mind stay within. This is called shama. A peaceful state of mind when it rests in steady contemplation of the goal. After muhur muhu, again and again detached itself from the chaos of the sense objects through a steady contemplation of their defects. Think it through. Think it through. What popped into my mind back in 2007, 2008, here in the United States, they were selling all these junk mortgages. They take these naive people and they say, well, I know you want this little 2-bedroom starter home, but look, you know, if we give you a balloon payment, you can get this fabulous 5-bedroom house in the hills with a swimming pool. You can afford the mortgage right now, but you can refinance at some point, blah, 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 blah. So all these people going, oh, big house, big house, big house. And guess what happens in 2008? All this house of cards comes crashing down, these junk mortgages, and thousands of people lost everything because of lack of understanding, caught up by their greed. How many times have we done it? So this is the way to be free from it. This is viveka and vairagya in the clearest sense. Clear discrimination. Brahma satyam jagan mithya. Brahman alone is real. The phenomenal world is illusory, meaning I think it's going to give me something lasting, and it never does. Vairagya, that desire to give up attachment to all the enjoyments of the world, and that desire to give up any identification with a personal sense of self. But as long as I'm under the delusion, I don't care what the scriptures say, I want stuff, that's going to make a difference. And then some people get caught in the Vedanta logic loop. Well, wanting a big house and a fancy car and a successful business and all this stuff, well, it's all an illusion. It doesn't matter. It's all the same. So I'm going to go for it anyway. And so is your suffering an illusion in the end. So we develop mature vairagya through insight, usually gained through humiliation, embarrassment, and suffering. Some people don't get the message. They keep after it. Any thoughts on this?
Jim, maybe this is a slightly tangential question, but it's something that comes to my mind a lot. because I work with several students, and each student has, let's say, a different research project. And we speak like you mentioned, the fact that everyone has our store of vasanas that are different, and they intersect with they seem to intersect with other people. With some students, you find that the going is very smooth in terms of the results that they get. With some students, it's like failure after failure after failure. And so, I mean, how do you see this mixing of asanas between different endeavors?
So you have two students who are disabled. You said you work with disabled students?
No, not disabled, different students,
Different
several
students.
different students. And
Okay,
each,
so
yeah,
one student has an aptitude. They're really smart.
they all have similar aptitude.
Well, let me finish my point.
Okay.
And they're willing to put in the work.
Right.
They have a greater chance of success. Another student may not have the aptitude, but they really are willing to work hard. They're likely to be somewhat successful. But the student who may be very brilliant, have a high IQ, but their kartavya, their obligatory actions, I must go out and drink beer every weekend. I have to go to the frat party. I have to spend all night on the dating apps and stuff like that. And they don't do well. And why do they fail? Well, 90% of success in life is just showing up.
Right.
Not bad luck.
Right. I'm saying, I'm asking something a little different. In my own personal experience, I see a set of students who are quite similar in aptitude and effort. Yet one student seems to encounter failure after failure, and another one seems to get get success without much,
Well, it's prarabdha karma. The question is, why are they failing? It's not bad luck.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, are they not understanding the principles? Have they made poor choices? Are these grad students?
Yeah.
Are they making poor choices in their research project? Have they got people on their committee that have access to grind? Is their politics getting in the way? There are answers. It's not just luck.
Right.
Now, some people, the product is very strong. I'm thinking of a young woman who was a graduate student up at the GTU, the Graduate Theological Union. And, in the midst of her doctoral work, she had thyroid cancer.
Oh.
So, a young woman, she was in her 30s. So everything ground to a halt while she had the surgery. And even before that, she was having all these health problems. They couldn't figure out what it was, and so in that sense, yes, her product from the past in terms of her health caused her to really, really struggle. Or someone else may have an issue of they're a graduate student and there's a family catastrophe, or their husband or wife leaves them, or a child dies, or something like that. Yes, of course, there are outside issues that can cause people to not do well.
Mm.
But what I would do would be to dig a little deeper on why is this person always failing?
Mm. Right.
Now, one of the things, for example, in the recovery community that I work with,
Mm-hmm.
almost without exception, the active alcoholic will get a psychotherapist and lie.
Oh.
They will never tell the therapist how much they're drinking. So the real cause of the failures, why did I get fired? Why did my wife leave me? All that sort of stuff seems mysterious because the real issue was never dealt with.
Mm.
There's just an example. There is a cause. It's not just luck.
Right, right, right.
And you know, that may not be your job to find that out. Maybe it is. I don't know if you're the advisor.
Mm. I was wondering, you mentioned the recovery community that you work with. Do you ever come across people who are trying too hard to recover and that gets in the way?
No.
Okay.
If someone thinks they're going to get recover on self-will, that can be a problem.
Right.
Because it's not about self-will, it's about surrender.
Right.
But that's an ancillary topic.
Right. Right. Right.
But a lot of people look like they're trying very hard. And usually, if they keep relapsing, there's some secret they're not dealing with. There's something they're holding back, some big issue.
Mm.
So my suspicion is your student with aptitude and effort, there's something there.
Mm.
And then you have to use your intuition.
Mm.
Is that useful?
Yes, Jim, that actually the ancillary part was particularly useful. Maybe we can talk more later. Yeah, thank you.
And you know, young people are sensitive. Frequently, you know, these outside issues can get in the way of work. We learn how to handle them a bit better with some experience in life as we age. A broken love affair can mess some college kid up terribly.
Yeah, for sure.
No, these are good questions. All right, next verse. We're still dealing with this obligatory actions, the compulsions, the going after the world. I was talking with a person, you know, they still want release from life by doing drugs. Well, I don't do it that often. But, you know, if it wasn't something that was important in your life, then why would you do it? I mean, it's all sorts of ways in which we have the capacity to lie to ourselves. All right, next verse.
Akashadapi vistirna lyajala bhudha pradapi asha pishachi prokteyam ramaya kama vasana. Rama, this mental impression due to desire, which is called the devil of expectation or wish, is more extensive than even the sky and more immovable than even a mountain.
So the idea, I'll be happy when, it'll be better if, what's wrong with me, what's wrong with my life, is people, places, things, and conditions. Till we can smash that hope. It's funny, in Dante's Divine Comedy, when Dante gets to hell, there's a sign over the gateway to hell. Anybody remember what it says? Abandon hope, all you who enter here. I say, that's not the gate to hell. That's the gate to heaven, to peace. We can smash the idea that's what's wrong with my life is people, places, things, and conditions. Let that go. As long as, if only I had a boyfriend, if only I had a girlfriend, if only I got married, if only I got unmarried, only I had children. Oh, if only I hadn't had children. You know, all these things. Where I live is wrong. If I move to another place, that'll be better. Then that didn't work. Let me try someplace else. My job is what's wrong with my life. I need to have a new career. I need a facelift. That'll fix everything. I get a facelift. All these things that the mind will present. I'll be happy when. It'll be better if. That is the great lie of Maya. And it causes kartavya, obligatory, compulsory efforts. It causes us, as Hamlet says, to grunt and sweat under a weary life. More, better, different. Any thoughts on this? Next verse.
Anayeva hi sarvoyam loka unmatva vatstitaha yena dandapyamano yam loka akrandyate sada. By this alone, all this mankind is existing like intoxicated persons and being very much burnt, by which this mankind is always lamenting.
So it is because of this kartavya caused by kama, craving, desire, that people run around, and by intoxicated here we mean I'm deluded, I'm fooled, and lamenting. This is the cause of my sorrow. Wanting, 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 wanting. Next one.
Kepi loke dhanyatama mahamantra samashrayat vinirmuktastaya bhanti nara sanvanga shitalaha. Some men in the world who are most fortunate through the practice of the great mantra in the form of supreme indifference to worldly desires, liberated from that kama vasana, shine, remaining calm in their entire body or being.
So shitala is the word he's used, which means cool. In the 50s, there was a slang word, stay cool, boy, be cool. 1,000 years old, 1,300 years old in India. Shitala manasaha. Have a cool mind. How do you have it? You've slain the demon of addiction, of compulsion, wanting, wanting. Doesn't mean not to act. But for the yogi, the world is trinkets and baubles, not precious gems. Play, sport. Don't take it serious. What should I do then, Jim? How can I, what'll I do with my life? Well, be of service. At least try to be useful. Do what you can to alleviate the suffering of other people. There's nothing wrong with the acquisition of money, big houses, fancy cars, if that's your prarabdha and they come. But if you're sitting at home unhappy because you don't have these things, or you struggling really hard to get them so you can, in America, we have the expression, keep up with the Joneses, so that you're doing better than the neighbors, doing better than your college chums. It's all just stupid. Next verse.
एताभिस्ते सृभा राम वासनार्भिर्यतो मनः समाक्रान्तमतो नूनं तत्त्वतत्त्वं नावभासते. Rama, since the mind is overcome by these three vasanas or mental impressions, therefore that true principle surely does not shine.
So the vasana of fault, misunderstanding or non-exposure to the scripture, don't even believe self-realization is possible, misunderstanding of what the teaching is. What was the second one?
Action.
Action. No, that's the third one, wasn't it?
Third one was desire.
Third one was desire. Yes, action and desire. All right, going on.
Ata sarva sadhanasya vasana nashanam phalam tatradhya hyaparadhyatva nishchayat vinivartate. Therefore, the removal of mental impressions is the fruit of all the means of our spiritual efforts. There, the first one, the vasana due to fault, comes to an end through the firm conviction of the faultiness of absence of faith and the like.
So, what the scripture is saying, all of our yoga is some form of vasana purgation. Why? Remember, a vasana, which is an impression left in the unconscious due to former egoistic actions, has two powers. The first and most terrible, veiling power of vritti or of varana shakti, non-apprehension of my essential nature. How do I know that my mind is covered by vasana? Because I think I'm a person. That's the vikshepa shakti. I think I'm a person, and there's serious business about getting what I want. So the first one, the vasanas of fault, through proper study of the scripture, Vyasa Vairagya. It's really what we were, remember that from the Yoga Sutra. Very, very good description of what needs to be done. Meditate, practice, let go of the world. Wear your life like a loose garment. Take it seriously. Any thoughts on this? Going on.
Tritiya janmanaikena nivatertapi janmabhi Ishwarena prasadena nanyatha koti yukti bhi. The second one, the mental impression due to karma or action, can come to an end in one life or many lives through the grace of God, not otherwise even by millions of practices.
Yes. So by grace, these compulsions to act can come to an end. But again, what Uday was saying, I still say there's always hope, the good kind of hope. Krishna says, my devotee is never destroyed. So what we want to do is put on the hat of what is my identity? If I have to have an identity in this world, I cannot see the no thingness of myself, by all means be a yogi. That's what Krishna says. Inside. Outside, you may have professor as your title, you may have project manager as your title, you may have software engineer as your title, but inside, I'm a yogi, meaning every experience of my life is an opportunity for sadhana. That's an intelligent way. Next verse.
Tritiya vinirvarteta vairagya disu sadhanaihi dosha drishyaiva vairagyam bhavenai vanyatha kvachit. The third one, the mental impression due to desire, can be removed by the excellent means like indifference to worldly enjoyments. Absence of worldly desires can arise only by the perception of defects in worldly enjoyments, not otherwise anywhere.
So here he is affirming what I said earlier. The only way to be free from the desires for the world is through an observation of the defects of the whole process. Read that verse again. So important.
The third one, the mental impression due to desire, can be removed by the excellent means like indifference to worldly enjoyments. Absence of worldly desires can arise only by the perception of defects in worldly enjoyments, not otherwise anywhere.
So willpower will fail us. And if we, in Gita, Krishna says that person who gets rid of the objects of desire but allows the desire to remain behind is verily a hypocrite. And if that's the way you approach it, eventually you will bend, you will pervert the mind and make it unfit for sadhana. And you can tell it when you've seen people who are in the religious and spiritual life in the West, monks and nuns and priests who have been refraining from desires out of willpower. And you can see them, they're just unhappy, nasty people. And I've seen swamis who are the same way. But in that shloka where Krishna says, person who gets rid of the objects but allows the desire to remind is verily a hypocrite. He follows that by saying, but his desire leaves him upon seeing the Supreme. So even before realization dawns on the mind, meditate, let go. You have even just moments where the mind is at peace. You're abiding in the sound. So clean, so pure, so inward. mind remembers it, then the same compulsion that drove you into the world will start to drive you towards the end. That's the cool thing about it. Thank God, God is the most beloved, or we'd all be in trouble. Right, next verse.
प्रोक्तानां वासनानां वै स्वल्पानल्प विभेदतः तस्याक्षाल्पानल्पा भाव अपेक्षा भवति Bhargava, on account of the difference of the smallness or abundance of the mental impressions described, that is, those due to desire, there arises the need for little or abundant contemplation of that perception of defects in worldly enjoyments.
So here he's saying, depending on how gross your mind is, that will determine how much of this contemplation about the defects of worldly desire, how much we have to renounce and stuff like that. For some people, they have very few worldly desires because of tapas done in other lives. Others of us, oh, we have a heart full of it. We have to do quite a bit of work. No blame. Takes what it takes. Next verse. How many more in this section? Because we're running out of time.
There's lots more in this chapter.
Okay, we'll do one more and then we'll
Tatradhyam sarvamulam syad mumukshutvam tachetarant mumukshamantara yaktu shavanam mananadikam na mukhya phala sanyuktam kevalam shilpavat bhavet na shilpa jnana matrena prapyate paramam padam. In that, desire for liberation would be the foremost and the basis of all means for realizing the self, and not any other. But the hearing of scriptural teachings, contemplation thereon, and the rest, which are pursued without desire for liberation, are not accompanied by the principal fruit, that is, the knowledge of the self, and they would be merely like skill in some art. The supreme state of knowledge of the self is not obtained by the mere knowledge of an art.
Yes. So there are those, because of culture, because of caste, who do spiritual practices as a kind of worldly wealth. Oh yes, our family, we're Trivadi. We have 3 Vedas that we know. Oh yes, we do ritual all the time. We are so pure, we toss our food into our mouths. We never have our hands touch our face. We're a little bit better than the other people. See, then spiritual culture becomes another worldly possession. Oh yes, I do 1,008 mantra repetitions every Sunday. But if you think of these as possessions and they're not informed by your mumukshutva, they have little effect. So here he says the engine that drives successful sadhana is I want to be free. I want to know. Any thoughts on this? Good place to stop. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om. Sri Guru Pyo Namaha. Hari Om. Thank you all.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Jim.